Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. It is Saturday, October 30th, 2021. It's the weekend, and what does that mean? The weekly recap. A recap of all of the top stories throughout the week here on Crime Talk, all in one convenient place. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk. Next on the docket, Alec Baldwin. Now, I took a little bit of heat last week when I said, man, seems like Alec Baldwin may want to lawyer up and maybe not keep talking to the police down there in Albuquerque. We'll see how that turns out, but I think I'm right, and I'll explain why as we go on. First, new details have emerged regarding the incident in which Alec Baldwin fired an alleged prop gun on the set of the movie Rust that resulted in the death of the film's director of photography, Halyna Hutchins. Now, according to a search warrant executed by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, Baldwin and crew were setting up a shot that required Baldwin to cross-draw a revolver and point the weapon at the camera. However, thanks to a shadow that was coming into the church structure from light outside, the camera had to be adjusted to a different angle. Baldwin was working with the director and the cinematographer, demonstrating how he was going to draw his revolver from its holster and where his arm would be for the new shot. While demonstrating, the firearm went off. So Joel Souza, who was also injured, explained Baldwin pointed the gun directly at the camera and fired, striking him in the shoulder and Halyna Hutchinson in the chest. Souza said he had a vague memory that Hutchins was complaining about her stomach and grabbing her midsection. Hutchins was immediately attended to by on-site medics and later airlifted to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she was eventually pronounced deceased. And director Joel Souza said 3 people were handling the gun for the scene. Armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed reportedly handled prop guns left on a cart outside the structure they were shooting due to COVID restrictions. Assistant Director Dave Halls handed one of those guns to Baldwin. According to the affidavit, Halls announced that it was a cold gun before giving it to the actor, meaning that the firearm was unloaded. As a result, Baldwin and the 2 people who were wounded believed the firearm was safe to use in the staging of the scene. Both the director and Russell noted that cameras were not rolling at the time as they were still setting up the shot. Souza said in the warrant that the cast and crew prepared the scene before lunch and then had their meal away from the shooting location around 12:30 p.m. He was not sure if the gun was checked again when everyone returned from lunch. However, he stated that firearms are supposed to be checked by the armorer, followed by the assistant director before handing them to the actor. He said he was not sure if people were checked for live ammunition on their person, but stated that live ammunition should not have been anywhere near the scene. Apparently, the production is also doing its own investigation review after crew members reportedly had other safety concerns. Steve Wolf, a special effects coordinator and theatrical firearms safety expert, said there were 3 errors committed that resulted in the tragedy. First, using a real gun rather than a prop gun. Second, having a live round in the gun and having people stand behind the camera in the line of fire. And third, the assistant director should not have been the one to clear the gun before the incident. That should have been the armorer's job. So what does that really mean? Well, it means obviously Alec Baldwin fired the weapon. Could he potentially be charged with some sort of criminally negligent homicide or reckless manslaughter? Yes, he could. Why? Because I can tell you, there are prosecutors in the state of Colorado that would say, we don't care how you got that gun. You're the one holding it. Regardless of who hits it, you never should have pointed at anybody in front of him, let alone pulled the trigger. And I've had that told to me even when you can prove that the firearm malfunctioned and discharged unexpectedly. Next, Alec Baldwin was the executive producer and owns the company that was part of this production team. He, as the individual responsible for the company, could face criminal charges for negligence. Negligence in the sense of hiring the wrong people, didn't follow the proper protocols. The armorer also has a problem. Assistant director potentially has a problem. Bottom line is something happened. And if they can find out who was the individual or individuals that thought it would be a good idea to put a live round into that firearm, they've got big problems. No doubt about it. There was a lot of unrest on the set. Apparently, the union workers were basically left in disgust for not being paid for some 3 weeks, which probably explains why people are trying to cut corners. And they brought in a non-union crew to work. Disgruntled employee, you just never know. Hopefully, that casing was collected and nobody touched it with their fingers without gloves or something along those lines, so they can possibly get a fingerprint or some sort of DNA off of that casing that was kept that was used in this firearm. Everybody's got a problem here in this particular case. Yes, the government always has to prove the mental state of mind of the individual knowingly, right? Yes, Alec Baldwin knowingly pulled the trigger to that firearm, but did he knowingly pull the trigger knowing there was a live round in there? That's what they'd have to prove. However, negligence, it's a real firearm. The prosecution could easily find experts to come in and say, you violated the firearm safety rules, and therefore you are negligent. We'll see how things shake out, or maybe nobody will be charged at all, and it's just a huge accident. Needless to say, there will be a civil case coming, although the question then becomes, since it was a workplace-related incident, is there exclusive remedy only that of workers' compensation and not a civil suit? Oh, you've got to love the law and everything that comes with it. Let's get to the Alec Murdaugh stuff because, well, let's just say we've talked about it in the 12 Undeniable Truths of Life about from a criminal defense attorney. That's right. It's always about the money. Next couple of stories, a lot of talk about the money. First, attorneys in 3 different civil lawsuits against Alec Murdaugh want a court to have an independent representative take control of Murdaugh's money and any other assets. The court motions in this case filed last week basically claim that they fear Murdaugh is trying to hide millions of dollars that they could possibly collect in their lawsuits by shifting money between unknown accounts and potentially selling off property and a boat after he turned all of his affairs over to his surviving son, Buster Murdaugh. Now, the similar motion in the 3 lawsuits includes several documents. One is a photo of Buster Murdaugh that lawyers said was taken in October at a Las Vegas casino, a nearly $1 million mortgage the property owner paid off to Alec Murdaugh, an online listing asking $114,000 for Murdaugh's boat, and a nearly 2-year-old unpaid tax bill that could lead to the auction of Murdaugh's beach home in Edisto Island. Now, Murdaugh's attorneys have not responded to the request to have the lawyers review and catalog all of Murdaugh's assets, bank accounts, insurance policies, and expenditures, and basically an approval of his spending. Alec Murdaugh has engaged in repeated dishonesty, according to the motions, which include deception and fraud. He has shown that he will go to extraordinary lengths to misappropriate, steal, transfer, or otherwise dispose of money in a manner that benefits him or his family with complete disregard for the interest of third persons. The lawyers wrote in their motions. Sounds pretty accurate so far. Now, while the power of attorneys may have some legitimate purposes for someone unable to manage their own finances, the power of attorney also provides a mechanism for Buster Murdaugh to transfer, sell, or otherwise handle all Alec Murdaugh's assets in a manner that diverts the assets, according to the motion. Now, in addition to the investigations in the stolen insurance money and insurance fraud case, state police continue to investigate the shooting deaths, millions of dollars missing from Murdaugh's former law firm, a 2015 hit and run death, and whether Murdaugh and his family obstructed the investigation into the boat crash, which was responsible for the death of Miss Mallory Beach. On Friday, October 29th, Judge Daniel Hall will hear motions filed by Mark Tinsley, who is representing Mallory Beach's family, Eric Bland, the attorney who found a paper trail of evidence showing how Murdaugh allegedly stole $3.6 million from Gloria Satterfield's grieving family, and Joe McCulloch, who is suing the Murdaughs on behalf of boat crash survivor Connor Cook. The first filed motion is to freeze Alex Murdaugh's assets. In the motion, Tinsley asks the court to appoint two outside parties. One is an attorney, John T. Lay Jr., and former U.S. Attorney Peter M. McCoy Jr. to have control over Alex and Buster Murdaugh's assets, which is known as a receivership. This would give Lay and McCoy broad power to not only lock up Alex and Buster Murdaugh's assets, but to sue for the recovery of the assets as well. So what that would mean is if monies were paid to anybody, the attorneys, the receiver, could then sue them to claw the money back. It's a thing. It happens. Nobody's entitled to ill-gotten gains, even if they didn't know about it. So the attorneys for the estate of Gloria Satterfield say they've reached a settlement with his former law firm. As we know, Satterfield died in 2018 in what was described as a trip and fall accident at the Murdaugh home. A settlement agreement stipulated $2.7 million for the Satterfield family, but they never saw that money. Instead, the money went to an account Murdaugh created and owned for his own use. This is all according to the affidavits in the filings. The Satterfields and the law firm have apparently reconciled their differences. Attorney Eric Bland, who represents the Satterfield estate. What does that mean? Reconciled? That means they've settled. 1 week ago, South Carolina Circuit Judge Clifton Newman denied Alex Murdaugh's bond. And when he denied bond, Newman ordered Murdaugh's defense team, made up of two of the most expensive attorneys in the state, to set up a psychiatric evaluation for their client. The psychiatric evaluation is now complete, but it's unclear who conducted the evaluation and obviously what those results are. They're going to remain sealed. All parties are now waiting for Newman to review the evaluation and recommend further action. If Newman accepts the results of the evaluation, the court could schedule another bond hearing for Murdaugh, although it's not clear right now what and when that would be. Now, depending on the results of the evaluation, the court could transfer Murdaugh to a psychiatric facility for further observation, or no action will be necessary. Now, this is not uncommon when somebody basically has a fall from grace. I'm sure the psychiatrist or psychologist that spoke with Mr. Murdaugh for this evaluation will probably say that he's got a little bit of anxiety because of some stress, probably a little depressed given his situation. But the attorneys, remember, the attorneys did not raise competency. It was the court that wanted to see, basically, is this guy stable? Is he going to do something stupid? I mean, he already had somebody to try and kill him. That's pretty stupid. So I think the court just wants to be safe. I still think, that's right, I still think Alex Murdaugh is not going to be leaving the jail cell. And if it was a high bond that was able to be posted, well, he's going to have some explaining to do where that money came from. It's always about the money, ladies and gentlemen. The docket for today, Thursday, October 28th, 2021. Well, first we have some more motions in the Vallow case. That's right. And guess what? Mark Means is back. So the motions that have been filed in the case by the Mr. Means, one thing is kind of noticeable is that, well, the other co-counsel on this case, Mr. Archibald, didn't file it, didn't even sign it. But they're apparently co-counsel, and Mark Means is going to do what he has to do. So let's talk about it in general, and then we'll go into much more detail. First, Mark Means filed a motion for the state to disclose Brady violation material. They're saying it's Brady violation. We've talked about this before. Brady v. Maryland is a United States Supreme Court's case that says that the prosecution must always turn over exculpatory evidence, and they have to turn over all evidence in the case. Even if it hurts the prosecution's case, they have a duty to turn that over. Second, the motion is also captioned motion for criminal depositions. Third, motion for out-of-state subpoenas. And fourth, a motion to disqualify the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. That's a mouthful, to say the least. Well, let's see exactly what's going on. So, Mark Means has filed this motion alleging that his client, who's currently committed to the psychiatric facility there in Idaho, is being manipulated by her caretakers. Lori and her husband face obviously multiple charges, including the murders of her children, Tylee and JJ. In June of 2020, the bodies of her children were found in the pet cemetery on Chad Daybell's property. Lori and Chad are known to have extreme religious beliefs, hence Lori's nickname, the Doomsday Mom. Now, Lori and Chad Daybell believed in reincarnation and that Lori Daybell was a goddess sent to bring the second coming of Christ. Now, earlier this year, Lori was deemed not competent to stand trial and confined to an Idaho psychiatric facility for treatment. Once she is deemed competent, her case will go forward. Now, according to these motions, this is a broad overview, filed by Means, Lori and the clinician treating her at the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare watched Chad Daybell's change of venue hearing together on October 5th of 2021. Okay, that's all right. I mean, frankly, she could watch it. It was open to the public, and my God, she's a defendant in the case. You would think it'd be okay to watch it. Now, during that hearing, the clinician recommended that Lori should contact LDS Church headquarters legal counsel to discuss her case and possibly obtain new legal counsel. It's alleged that the clinician even reportedly provided the phone number and told her that making that call was a part of her treatment. According to Mr. Means, Lori didn't want to make that call. She felt forced to do so. It was like her homework assignment. And when Lori told her treating clinician that she had informed Mr. Means about the call, clinician said, "No, you didn't." Now, Lori spoke to Daniel S. McConkey at the LDS Legal Counsel offices, and according to the motion, Lori made Brady violation disclosures under the guise that the church was her friend and was there to assist her. Means insists Lori would not have made those disclosures without McConkey's assurances that he already knew every detail of her case. Now, Means reported that McConkey never disclosed to Lori that there was a conflict of interest or that their conversation was not, in fact, protected by attorney-client privilege. Lori believed she would be protected by the rules of the spiritual world. Means stated that McConkey disclosed the details of the conversation he had with Lori to prosecutor Rob Wood. Wood later revealed that Lori only told McConkey that she wanted a new appointed public defender. According to the motion, this was not true. Now, in the motion, Means goes to describe Lori's obsession with LDS Church and her belief that LDS legal counsel can control and manipulate the court system, judges, prosecution, and the like in this very case. Now, according to Means, Lori's beliefs were used against her without her attorney's supervision or knowledge, and calling these actions unethical and possibly illegal. Means suggested that the LDS Church might be working in tandem with the prosecution to manipulate Lori into making statements that were not in her best interest. Now, these behaviors, if true, stated Means, are clearly unethical and possibly illegal to undermine defendants' constitutionally protected rights. Well, let's take a much closer look, all right? And we'll talk about this. Now, as you have to remember, Mark Means has always made some pretty bold and sometimes over-the-top allegations as it related to prosecutorial misconduct. And I think it's worth noting for the record, I think every allegation that he has made of misconduct, it's always unethical, illegal, blah, blah, blah. They've been denied and found to be, well, for lack of a better term, frivolous, okay? Sanctions haven't been imposed, but this may be getting really close to that. Now, Rob Wood has put out a statement saying that he's not going to talk about these motions that have been filed because they're usually filed under seal, given the fact that there's medical information which would be protected under various HIPAA laws. So as is stated, the motion very generally goes on. It starts off all these motions to state disclosure violations, Brady violations, criminal depositions, etc. So let's go through it in much more detail. So the motion outlines that on June 8th, the court entered an order of commitment regarding defendants Miss Lori Vallow /Daybell, and she was further committed to the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. Apparently, on October 15th of 2021, Mr. Means went down and met the defendant, Lori Vallow, in person at the committed site under the control of the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. And during this discussion, it was brought to my attention of unethical and possible illegal activity, discussions, disclosures, and manipulation of the incompetent defendant. Prior to said meeting, the defendant was and currently is being treated by a clinician believed to be employed by the facility, and that on or about October 5th, said clinician and defendant were engaged in watching the transfer of trial motion regarding defendant Chad Daybell. During the hearing, the clinician allegedly recommended that the defendant, Lori Vallow, should contact the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, their counsel, to discuss her case and possibly obtain legal counsel to assist her in her case. It's also alleged that the clinician took the recommendation further and then provided the defendant with the direct telephone number to contact the LDS Church Council and issued an order that it was part of the defendant's homework for her treatment. Now, the clinician apparently checked in with the defendant to ensure this assignment was completed, and the defendant thought it was a good idea to call the LDS Corporation. It says that the defendant would not have done so on her own without the prodding of the employee, the clinician, and that the defendant repeatedly said she didn't want to call LDS Church for the fact that it was a mandatory homework to call and discuss the disclosure. Sometimes after this mandatory homework assignment was issued to the defendant and the LDS phone number was provided, the defendant called, apparently, the church headquarters in Salt Lake City, Utah, spoke with a female receptionist and asked to speak to the church legal counsel. The receptionist asked who this was. The defendant disclosed that she was seeking legal counsel regarding her case and gave her name. And then she was transferred to the chief legal counsel, Mr. Daryl McConkey. Now, apparently the defendant introduced herself and Mr. McConkey by name and made a Brady violation disclosure under the guise that the church was her friend and was there to assist in both temporal and spiritual matters directly regarding her current criminal state of legal affairs. He apparently bragged about his experience as a criminal litigation as a prosecutor and told the defendant that he knew every detail of her case. This led the defendant to make disclosures without any assurances. McConkey, as legal counsel, never advised the defendant of the possible conflict of interest, that he was not licensed in Idaho to practice law, possible Brady violations, impossibility of his representation of her in an Idaho criminal matter. But apparently Mr. McConkey was eager to discuss her case, but only after certain disclosures were made by the defendant. Now, Ms. McConkey told her that he would assist her in finding an attorney that could legally practice law in Idaho and possibly provide her assistance with her matter. Now, you have to remember what's taking place here. You have an attorney that is taking the word of his client who is incompetent because, well, let's face it, she thinks she's a goddess and she's here for the second coming of Jesus Christ. So I think you'd have to take what she says with a bit of a grain of salt. The allegations then go on that Ms. Vallow said that she relayed that she had contacted the conversation with the LDS counsel to Mr. Means, and she looked rather concerned. Mark Means alleges that it's publicly well-documented obsession with the LDS Church/corporation and her controlling beliefs of its divine origins and truth in religious matters. And to the point, the LDS Church and its legal counsel and the like control and manipulate the court system, judges, prosecutors, and the like in this very case. This imbalance or unrealistic belief appears to have been purposely used against the defendant to engage in something which would get her in trouble. Okay. Now, Mr. Means is alleging that the LDS Church has embedded himself into this case by way of its public statements and has incentives to disavow connection between the defendant and the church. And then Mr. Means goes on and says that the prosecution has allowed or attempted to manipulate essential witnesses with the use of the LDS Corporation, the church, LDS language, and LDS positions of power, specifically as to essential witness Melanie Gibb, David Warwick, and April Raymond, and this includes formal court proceedings. So, Mark Means is asking for the state to disclose communications, including but not limited to Brady violation disclosures. Well, I really think Mr. Means should go and read Brady v. Maryland, okay? They have the prosecution obviously has a duty to turn over everything that they have about the case within their control and possession. And if the church council contacted the DA's office, there would be some memo that was obviously turned over at some point to the defense, or will be. But if the client calls up and makes admissions or statements to somebody not her attorney, well, what can you say? She's incompetent, and well, we'll just have to wait and see. Let's just say I take with a bit of grain of salt what Mark Means puts in his motions. Maybe he's completely 100% accurate, but I think it's a little bit over the top once again. So he's asking for information, and he wants to get this everybody on board and start having motions, and then he wants depositions. He wants depositions of Robert Wood, the prosecutor. Not going to happen. Depositions of the clinician. Out-of-state depositions of the attorney, Mr. McConkey, the Utah attorney, and any other LDS officials or persons privy. Authorization issuance of out-of-state subpoenas and order of productions. Once again, I've said this before. In criminal cases, you don't have depositions. You can go interview witnesses only in a rare circumstance. If there is somebody that is going to pass away, they're going to go out of the country, you can take a preservation deposition. Yes, that's about it. You can subpoena people, you can interview them, but they can refuse to talk to the defense investigator or defense attorneys. Out-of-state depositions. The court in Idaho has no jurisdiction over anyone in Utah and cannot order anyone to appear for a deposition in Utah for an Idaho case. The court has no jurisdiction to do that. Same thing with subpoenas. The subpoena from Idaho to another state like Utah, for lack of a better term, is usually not worth the piece of paper that is written upon, okay? It'd be highly unlikely that anybody would respond. And to get subpoenas and things of that done, you have to do what they call basically an interstate rendition, where you go to court here and say, here's a subpoena or here's a summons for somebody to appear. Then they have to have those people appear in the state court to have them appear to say, you need to appear in court to do this. It's not a simple process. Now Mr. Means is working as a court-appointed counsel. Guess what? You got to be able to pay for it, and they're probably not going to pay for that unless you can clearly articulate that. He also wants everybody disqualified from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. Specifically, anyone from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare and their agents for treatment or involvement with the defendant. Really, where is that going to take place then, Mr. Means? Really? Lori Vallow is in the control, care, and custody of the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. Where do you think she is going to be restored, Mr. Means? He wants an order of conduct to all of the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare officials and his agents to protect her rights, and oversight of defense counsel for all future treatment and the like provided by the state. Once again, Mark Means is trying to interject himself in basically supervising the restoration process of Lori Vallow. Let me just calculate here what the chances are of prevailing that, in my humble opinion. 0. That's right. 0. Not going to happen. Once again, Mark Means is at it again. He is coming out swinging. He's been quiet. We thought maybe he had faded from the limelight. Once again, Mr. Archibald is not a signator on the motion, and in fact, he is not even listed on the return of service. Don't you think you'd probably put your co-counsel on the return of service? I would. Never a dull moment. Never a dull moment. We'll see what happens. I think a whole lot of nothing, and we'll leave it at that, at least for today. All right. Next on the docket, the threat of imminent incarceration tends to break the bonds of loyalty. I have seen people roll on family members and people that they thought they would never roll on simply because, well, they thought they were going to prison. And it has begun in the Alec Baldwin shooting, okay? And, well, we should say murder. It was a murder. Let's call it what it was. Now, the lawyers for Hannah Gutierrez Reed, the head armorer for the Rust shoot that was taking place, said in a statement that Hannah is devastated and completely beside herself over the events that have transpired. Now, as most people know, Alec Baldwin discharged a real gun. It was not a prop gun on this New Mexico movie set, which led to the death of the cinematographer Helena Hutchins and injuring director Joel Souza. Now, the attorney for the armorer goes on and says safety is Hannah's number one priority on the set. Ultimately, the set would never have been compromised if live ammo were not introduced. Hannah has no idea where the live rounds came from, and Gutierrez-Reed and her lawyer are claiming the real culprit is the person who introduced the live rounds on the set. Well, there's a lot of people that have a lot of responsibility on the set. Clearly, somebody who introduced those live rounds, the person responsible for making sure there were no live rounds in the gun, and ultimately the person who took the gun, who fired the gun, should have been aware what was in that gun. Well, the lawyers also say that the guns were locked up at night and during lunch, which is also what Gutierrez-Reed has originally told authorities. Now, her lawyers cast some blame on the producers. Of course, one of the producers is Alec Baldwin, for overloading her with work on the set, saying that Gutierrez-Reed was hired for 2 positions on this film, which made it hard for her to focus on her tasks. Apparently, another job on set was the key assistant for the props. And let's call it for what it was. It's not a prop. It was a real gun. Okay. Now, the lawyers say she fought for training days to maintain weapons and proper time to prepare for gunfire, but ultimately was overruled by the production department. The whole production set became unsafe due to various factors, including the lack of safety meetings. Now, the statement also seems to acknowledge there were at least 2 misfires of the weapon in the days prior to the fatal shooting, and first was fired by the prop master on set, and a second was a stuntman after Gutierrez-Reed informed him that the gun was hot with blanks. As you can see, everyone is pointing the finger at everybody else because nobody wants to be responsible. I get it. I wouldn't want to go to prison either. But somebody's probably going to be charged, and they should be, okay? And I can't imagine why the attorneys are making statements. Although these statements may be consistent with what was said to the authorities during interviews, still not good. These people need to lawyer up, and they need to shut up, and really nothing ever good comes from trying your case in the news media. It simply is not a good thing. It's never worked very well, and at least in my humble opinion, I think they should all just keep their mouth shut and let the prosecution make the charging decisions if they're going to do that. And as we all know, the authorities still haven't announced whether criminal charges will be filed. Wait and see. They're obviously dotting their I's, crossing their T's before they do it, because it's probably going to involve some, well, famous people.